Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am Screen Scene Guru, and today I'll be discussing Star Trek Next Generation Season 1. I fully got through it, so this is a continuation of my Star Trek reviews. Really fascinating to hear that this first season came out in 1987, so it is officially 38 years old, but we're still learning fascinating things about it. So let's get into the series recap so we can get into our comic reviews. Really fun time. So be sure to like the video, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already. I've already made it to 80 subscribers. So shout out to all the people that are supporting the channel. Thank you very much. But let's get into the coverage. So starting off with episode 1, we've got Encounter at Farpoint, which was a very good episode. They don't have it highlighted on the IMDb page, but I would say it's one of the best Star Trek episodes ever made. And as a new Star Trek enthusiast, going through all the original series, I'd say that counts for something. On a maiden mission, the USS Enterprise NCC 1701D, so this is the new Galaxy class ship, an opponent known as the Q entity challenges the crew and discovers the secret of a mysterious base in an advanced civilization. So a very interesting episode. This was, of course, the ones with the jellyfish. And this was a two-part episode for some of the Blu-ray discs, if you got them. They actually broke this up into two parts, or one long extended episode that was kind of like a movie. So very interesting. Encounter at Farpoint. We get to see the introduction of Riker, first officer. They pick him up. So very interesting stuff there. Then going on to episode 2, we've got The Naked Now. The crew of the Enterprise is infected with a virus that causes them to behave as though they were intoxicated. So this is a bit of a shout out to the original classic Star Trek series. There was an episode where radiation from a star, a nova, was affecting the crew of the Enterprise. And this did happen, in fact, in the comic books as well. So very interesting stuff here. Going on to episode 3, we've got Code of Honor. When the leader of an alien culture takes a romantic interest in Lieutenant Yar, he claims her for his own, to dismay of his own wife, who is in turn challenging Tasha for a fight to the death. So this was a pretty good episode with the first security officer, Lieutenant Yar. I liked her performance very much. This was a standalone one of her episodes where she had to, fight for her freedom, fight for her right to be independent. So that was really good. The crew ended up rescuing her and getting her back on board the Enterprise. Episode 4, we've got Last Outpost. The Enterprise makes a confrontational first contact with particular Ferengi race, as their two ships are insured by presumed death planet, ready to judge them. It's a very interesting episode where we get to introduce to the Ferengi, one of these traders, kind of smuggler races that likes to trade in different high-value items. This Ferengi, of course, was coming to get revenge on Captain Picard for years prior, him getting in a conflict with his son. And they introduced a psionic device that was giving him kind of Havana syndrome, these signals in the brain that were letting him act right. It's a very interesting episode. Episode 5, we've got Where No One Has Gone Before. Everyone occasionally pegs to visit populist scientist as a charlatan, but Wesley Crusher recognizes his alien assistant as the real deal. So this is, of course, where the travelers come in. We get to find out a bit more about how they like to warp space-time, and this is a new form of transportation the Federation has discovered. While this, I believe he's an officer in the Federation, is posing as he's cracked these codes, cracked this new math. Really, it's his alien assistant who is using his own abilities to transport the ship. and Wesley recognized that. So that's cool. Episode 6, we've got Lonely Among Us. While distracted by the two ethereal races applying for Federation membership, the Enterprise picks up a sediment entry that can alternately possess either man or machine. So very interesting stuff here. We come across a new type of life form that can interact with physical beings and technology. It even gets inside the ship. This was very interesting as well. Going to episode 7, Justice. On an alien planet, young Wesley Crusher commits a transgression, small by our standards, but mandatorily punishable by death in theirs. And they have to, of course, dip with Wesley to try to save his life, but this culture does say, you've interfered with our rules, our laws, which has kept our culture peaceful for generations. So there's kind of a moral conflict for the captain, but he chooses to save Beverly's child. Then episode 8, we've got The Battle. Beware Ferengi bearing gifts. Captain Picard receives the Stargazer, a ship considered lost that he once commanded. It's a really awesome episode. A lot of people are questioning what's going on with the captain once he, gets obsessed with his past and this tragedy, like most captains had, that they made bad decisions or something in their past comes up and they kind of lose their ability to handle situations. So it's very interesting. Episode 9, Hiding Q. This was another Q episode. Enterprise encounters Q again, and he attempts Riker by endowing him with the powers of Q, which was, I thought, really fascinating stuff. They are going into the fact that these aliens need something from us, some emotional attachment or some ability to grow and expand that they don't have anymore, which is pretty fascinating. Episode 10, so we're about almost halfway through. Haven. While on a mission to a planet called Haven, Counselor Troy meets her husband-to-be, marriage arranged by her father years before, as the Enterprise encounters a ship far deadlier than any combat could provide. So very interesting stuff here. We do find out that there's a race of aliens that contract this virus, and everywhere they went, the planets would die. This weird species was going to Haven, where they ended up picking up this doctor so that he could cure them. And the last remaining, I believe, 6 of their civilization could survive on their own, not having to worry about spreading the virus. So this was really good stuff here. Episode 11, we've got The Big Goodbye. Captain Picard and some of his crew are caught in a deadly trap in the holodeck as a result of a ship-wide scan from an alien race. So this is very interesting as well. They go into in the 19th century and fighting crime with cops. And The Big Goodbye was basically this hologram recognized that once Picard left, he wouldn't have a world to go back to, which was very fascinating. That holograms with the updated computer had real concept and consciousness, similar to Moriarty later on in the series. But yeah, this was a good episode. Episode 12, we've got Data Lore. This is where Data finds his brother. Another really good episode I would recommend. Episode 12. The Enterprise visits a planet where Data was created and discovers another android like him. But when he's assembled, he's not exactly like him. So, of course, we know the story of Data and Lore, the brothers that are facing off against each other throughout time. They do bring him back in Star Trek Picard as well, which I liked that very much, where they finally merged as one. But going on to episode 13, Angel 1, Riker, Troy, and Diana and Yar beam down to a planet ruled by marcational government in a hope of locating a missing fighter crew. So this is an interesting episode as well. This planet was ruled entirely by women, and they figured out that a starship, a cruise liner, or a freighter had crashed there sometime before, a few years back, and the Enterprise was sent to look for survivors. and the survivors of that planet had ended up fathering children. They had wives, a whole family going on, and they were trying to raise the status of men on this planet, give them voting rights, give them, equal compensation and deciding rules. But these men were considered outlaws, and they were going to be rounded up and killed. But the Enterprise ended up preventing them from doing that. So very interesting stuff there about, just different cultures and rules of theirs. Episode 14 was a really good episode, 1100101. The Enterprise docks in a starbase for repairs as it's commanded by the race of technologically linked aliens intent on using the vessel for their own purposes. So this was the Betazoids. Really fascinating that they're, analog and binary system works, and how apparently their nova on their planet went off faster than predicted. Their main computer was shut down, what they survived off of, what they all lived off of, and they needed to download the entire memory bank of their civilization onto the Enterprise computer and bring it back to their planet to reboot their civilization. So it was really fascinating. Episode 14, we've got too short a season. The Enterprise transports an elderly Starfleet admiral to negotiate a hostage crisis. When the admiral takes a de-aging drug, he endangers both his life and the mission. So very interesting stuff here. We get to find out that this admiral went to a planet after years of negotiating peace deals. These aliens gave him a ritual to perform de-aging, and it ended up working. He kind of goes after the captain as far as who leads the mission. But of course this leads to him having convulsive, body aches and eventually dying from the process. So it's not very good for de-aging if you die. But episode 16, we've got When the Brot Breaks. A planet that was able to cloak itself for thousands of years suddenly reveals itself, with its inhabitants promoting peace. But after its initial negotiations, children of the Enterprise are kidnapped due to the infertility of the inhabitants. So this planet, of course, they discuss they can't have children anymore. They don't know exactly why, but they basically plan on abducting several of the Enterprise children, because at this point the Enterprise is carrying full families. And this culture decides that if they share star maps and other information where galaxies we haven't been to yet, that's basically the equivalent, the value of these children that would take on positions in their society and go on to have more children. But we end up getting them back. Picard gets the kids back on the Enterprise. He says there's no deal worth trading children to us, to the Federation. Other lesser species might have done that, offered that, but the Federation said no. So going on from there, we've got Home Soil, episode 17. On Varia 3, Geordi and Data discover a microscopic life form responsible for the death of an engineer stationed on the base. So this is very interesting. They are mining this planet, terraforming it, and they discover these life forms that they bend light. They're kind of like little flickers in caves, and when light is shined on them, they absorb that and they procreate. So they are an intelligent life form, even though they're non-physical, they're non-carbon based. So that's really amazing. Then we've got episode 18, Coming of Age. Picard finds himself facing a Saturnius test of his loyalty to Starfleet once which of the team members of the crew are struggling to cope with, whilst Wesley faces an equally challenging entrance exam at Starfleet Academy. So this was a good episode, I thought. You got to see the introduction of how these kids do tests, the sort of tests they put them through. I thought that was really cool. Hoping to get more of that in Star Trek Academy. That would be really fun to see. Whole season of it. Going on to episode 19, we've got Heart of Glory. The Enterprise searches for answers to why three Klingon warriors were the only survivors aboard a freighter inside of the neutral zone. which seemingly attacked the Ferengi ship. So this was an interesting episode with Worf. Worf got to connect with his people. He got a little bit of background into his upbringing, that Romulans killed his parents. He was raised by humans on a farming world. So he's never really got to experience the hunt or other ritualistic practices with Klingons before. They tried to convince him to join their group, and he chose the Federation, Starfleet. So that's very interesting. They were on the run Klingon prisoners, so they ended up having to give them back to the Klingon Empire, which means death for them, for their culture. Episode 20, we've got the Arsenal of Freedom. The Enterprise encounters a planet long dead, but technological equipment still functions for the purpose of selling off its Aristil along with self-sufficiency. This was a cool episode. Kind of a weird episode that this planet was technologically still active, and it was selling off bits of itself, minerals, for power source to still function. So it kind of cannibalized itself almost to continue functioning, continue the work. So that was very interesting. Episode 21, we got Symbiosis. The Enterprise encounters two neighboring cultures, one suffering from a plague, the other making the cure. That they learn that nothing is as simple as it seems. So Symbiosis is about, of course, this virus plagued these two species. One of them came up with a medicine for it and ended up curing themselves, while the other, they're leaning on them, depending on the medicine, to take away their pain, their body aches, but it acts more as a narcotic drug, and the other culture has become dependent on the one making it. So it's very similar to drugs and the addiction problem facing the world. So this was a very interesting call on the cultures, dependent on one shuttling back this drug to the other. And Picard wouldn't allow them to have the tools to do that, so they'd have to figure out a way to survive without this drug. Episode 22, we've got Skin of Evil. Counselor Troy is held captive on a desperate planet by a sick, black, oily sediment creature, immortal puddle of evil. So very interesting here. We do find out that there are weird entities that exist throughout time, that have been just, observant through the cosmos. This entity, I believe it gives itself a name, but they refer to it as a new form of life, Skin of Evil. This black goo tries to get onto their ship. It does take on a humanoid shape after they appear to it. It first appears as a river, a lake, and then it takes on a human form, human shape. And it's basically evil incarnate, which I thought was very fascinating. Episode 23, We'll Always Have Paris. A scientist's experiment in time goes awry, returning Picard to an old flame, now married to the scientist. So we get to see a little bit of Picard's background, his romance with scientist in Paris. He left on the sides of Paris when he went to go join Starfleet, take off in the Star Cruiser, or Stargazer. Really interesting stuff there with the holodeck. They recreate the area where they were supposed to meet, so that was fun. Then going on to episode 24, this was Conspiracy. I really liked this episode as well. None of these episodes got highlighted when they should have. After diverting to a secret meeting with an old friend and some of Starfleet's finest commanders, Picard finds the Harato blown to bits just after hours of the meeting, and he returns to the Enterprise to Earth looking for answers. So this was, of course, a follow-up to another episode that they were talking about. Senior members of Starfleet are not acting normal. They're guessing their way through historical places and times, and that if you ask, these higher-up captains, they don't know the questions that you're asking about. And they ended up discovering that they were bugs infiltrating Starfleet from another unknown galaxy. They had an episode where they were being reviewed, and the ship was being investigated on about reports. Remick, who was the investigating officer, was in fact infected on another planet with this species queen. It burrowed inside him, and then he continued to bring back bugs from this planet to infect others. Once they found this out, they phasered Remick and the creature inside him, and once the queen was destroyed, the bugs had no longer control over their hosts. They all fled the bodies. So it was very fascinating. They were unknown species, cataloged as invasive, predatory. But episode 25, the last episode, the neutral zone. While assigned to investigate missing outposts in the neutral zone, the Enterprise receives 3 technological frozen people found aboard a wayward, derelict Earth vessel. So this was a very fascinating episode about, companies preserving life, trying to keep people extended their lives into the future. Also about how the Romulans had bases on the neutral zone and the Federation. They both were attacked, the people taken by an unknown greater power. They never go into the explanation of what happened to the 9 Federation outposts and several Romulan, but this is the introduction of the Romulans back after hundreds of years of silence. So this is really fascinating. I'll go into a little bit of Season 2, because I have begun Season 2. So starting off, you can do The Child, which was Episode 1. Diana is impregnated with an unknown life form, and Dr. Catherine Pulaski joins the Enterprise as the ship's new chief medical officer. So I really like this episode, an older doctor for Season 2. And of course, Diana Troy raising this child that seemed to be a ball of light that came into the ship. And then she raised it in a day, and then it left. So very emotional for her, but it seemed like it was one to experience life itself. So that's very fascinating. It was in 1988. Where Silence Has Lens. The Enterprise encounters a mysterious void in space, and when they move in closer to investigate further, it envelops them, and they can't get out. So this is a very interesting episode as well. Sort of a negative zone, if you will, of space, where there's no stars, it's just black, and it envelops the ship. They try to fly out of it at warp speed. This creature inside the void is basically taunting them. It wants to understand what they are. It then allows an opening and the Enterprise to shoot out. But once they are out of the void, they're nowhere near where they launched from. They're thousands of light years away. So very interesting stuff there. It does mess with their instruments and their computer. We've got episode 3 of Season 2, Elementary Dear Data. An attempt to provide Data with a challenging Sherlock Holmes holodeck program backfires when Professor Moriarty character accidentally becomes self-aware. So this is the episode I was talking about. Really fascinating here that he discovers there's life outside of this room, this realm. He draws the Enterprise, which makes Data straight up leave the holodeck and issue a security alert. And of course, Moriarty can control the ship in some aspects. So that was very interesting. We've got the outrageous Okana. The Enterprise rescues a captain of a broke-down freighter, only to become involved in a dispute between feuding worlds, each demanding custody of their guest. Data seeks help from Guion in understanding humor. So, Gian, really awesome. Whoopi Goldberg introduced into the show in Season 2 as their bartender in 10 Forward. So that was awesome. We've got Loud as a Whisper. The crew ferries a deaf mediator to Solaris 5 to negotiate an end to a civil war. This was a very interesting episode as well, with Riva, who is deaf, but he had 3 interpreters that interpreted his psychic and mental projected thoughts. We had passion, there was logic, and I believe there was justice, 3 of them. But they all got phasered on this planet, and when he lost his chorus, it was very hard for him to communicate until Data learned his version of sign language. So that was very fascinating as well. We've got the Strixoid Man, a dying antisocial scientist unintentionally comes upon the perfect vessel in which to preserve his intellect and arrogant personality, Data. So this is a very fascinating episode as well. Episode 6, we did find out about this, cybernetic scientist breaking through. He did want to download himself into a computer, but then of course once he saw Data and how he was made by, I believe, Union Singh, he realized he could download himself into Data because Union learned a lot of his technological precise devices from him. So in a way he was his grandfather, Data's grandfather, who possessed his body for a moment, was speaking out to the captain, and then eventually they had to put him back into the ship's computer where he lost his consciousness. He retained all his information, but he was no longer speaking badly to the captain, so that was very interesting. But yeah, I'm on episode 7 of season 2, so I'll stop my review right there. I do want to do real quick comic book review for you guys, because I have read this Star Trek Jim, You're Dead comic, which I thought was really fun, from DC, starting off with Jim being stabbed in his captain's quarters, which was very fascinating to see. Him trying to reach the terminal to call for help, and then we get to see a fantastical vision of him sailing a captain's ship along with the Enterprise, which is really cool. That's like his ethereal other life. And then he sees Spock. Spock immediately recognizes something is amiss. He can feel something's wrong with the captain, which leads him to leave the bridge and immediately start racing down, calling for a medical team to the captain's quarters. Really cool coverage there. We get to see Dr. McCoy again, asking what the hell's going on, of course. We get to see Captain Kirk confuses a medical officer with David, his son, who passed in one of the previous movies. I believe it was Star Trek 3, Search for Spock. That was very interesting. We could see Bill Bearclaw, who doesn't like the captain. We believe he's the one responsible for him getting in this fight. Talking about how he prefers the captain be gone, good riddance. Then we get to see their kind of battle clash in the ethereal plane, and they're working on Captain Kirk, the medical office. So that's really cool. Then we get to get into a bit of Ahora's backstory and how she pondered quitting the Federation. I do like that they kind of went into this in Strange New Worlds with Pike reassuring Ahura that she's making the right decision, but in the comics it was Kirk. But yeah, really cool to see all of the crew remembering the great times of Kirk, and then his spirit wandering around the ship. So that's kind of funny. We get to see Chekhov talking about how he was a giant to him, bigger than anybody on the ship, bigger than life itself. So it's hard to imagine he's in such a bad way. Then we get to see Kirk's little brother, Sam, who's waiting for him in the cosmos. We get to see Scotty cleaning the decontamination chamber, where, of course, Kirk died. Or Spock died, depending on which version of the film you like. You like Into Darkness, where Kirk dies, or you like the original Wrath of Khan, where Spock dies? Either or. Really cool stuff there. We get to see Scotty remembering them having an away team. And then we get to get a real spooky vibe of Captain Pike, very Halloweenish. That Pike is warning him about the dangers of being captain. You don't want to wind up like me, and then he turns into a skeleton. So very interesting stuff from Captain Pike. And then of course Spock does a mind meld with him, trying to lure him out of this astral plane. And then of course we get to see David and Sam meeting in the astral plane, trying to convince Kirk to join them. And Spock has to tell them there are important matters to attend to. You can join them on your own time, basically. And he has to do a rain check. But that was the end of this comic. And then, of course, he asks for Bear Claw's head on a pike, because he's real pissed. But yeah, awesome comic review. Going into Season 1 and a bit of Season 2 of Next Generation. So what do you guys think of the coverage? Till next time, bye-bye. This is me, signing out. Ciao.